Hello, my precious viewers. Welcome back to another episode of the Adaptation Journey podcast, or A Journey Through Adaptations. I might have butchered that name for a second, but I got it right next. Alright, well, welcome back to this episode. Today we're going to be discussing, as you can probably tell from the image, Avatar The Last Airbender. How fun is that, guys? It's a Specifically, we're talking about not the Netflix adaptation, but the movie adaptation, the one that came out in 2010, M. Night Shyamalan, after the show was already ended. Um, it's very different, and we'll get into that in a second. But I also want to preface that today's episode of this podcast will have clips in it. Yay! That's exciting. Only a few clips. We're going to keep it a bit on the shorter side this time, because this last one's kind of long. But yeah, besides that, let's get into it. So, Avatar: The Last Airbender is a show I have seen countless amount of times now. I want to say, well, I can count them actually. I think like 4 times I've seen them. They're The way the show is made is just they must have had like every fiber of genius in it because it's a masterpiece in my opinion. So this episode might be a bit biased, but the movie by M. Night Shyamalan, in my opinion, does a lot of things wrong when adapting this show. And we're going to start off by talking about how it adapts the characters from Avatar The Last Airbender. Specifically, how it adapts our main characters. So, let's start off with how this movie does the character of Katara, because I think she's maybe the one done dirtiest by this movie. Originally, Katara, like all other characters in the show, is one is a character that has a bunch of depth to her. She uh, has to exist in a culture that is sexist and goes directly against what she wants for herself. Already a very compelling reason for her to be doing what she's doing and add struggle to her life. She has complexities in her character from the death of her mother and her having to try to basically become a pseudo mother for her brother, and that leads to her maturing way too fast for her age, and now she's stuck in this mindset where she struggles to have fun. That's a big concept in episode 2 or 1, I think, where Aang has to try to be a kid again because she still is a kid. And Katara's sexism is also important. Later on, she has to fight. I think it's Master Piao, who is at the Northern Water tribe and is the master of Aang, but refuses to teach Katara because she is a girl, and girls in this world are supposed to be healers only. And so Katara has to prove herself to this old man, and she does that by beating him in a fight. And it's a very powerful moment for her character because it's her literally going against the system that has been trying to keep her down for the whole first of book 1, which is how much the movie covers. The movie covers from the beginning of the show to the end of book 1. So that's all we're going to be talking about this episode. Um, but yeah, in the movie, though, contrast to what I just talked about with Katara, in the movie, you don't really see any of this. Katara is very much a blank character. She doesn't do much. She does the actions Katara does in the show, like the plot actions she does, like defending Aang from Zuko when Aang is in the spirit world, and being Aang's ally, and helping him out. But she doesn't have any of these character traits that I have discussed. She doesn't have the fight with Master Fao. She really even the love triangle not love triangle, but the love interest angle of Aang having a crush on Katara and isn't there at all, which is, I mean, that's fine, but it's just, it's all these things they could have added to at least give Katara to do something in this movie besides just moving the plot forward. Because then she just ends up feeling empty, which is how she feels in the movie, in my opinion, because she doesn't get to do any of these character building moments, like, which I'll get into later about how they cut out a lot of things in this movie from the show. But she also has supposed to have her own arc with Jet, who is this mysterious bad boy guy who is rebelling against the Fire Nation, and Katara ends up having a little crush on him. And then she realizes that he takes his actions too far and he goes to too much extremes, which leads Katara to, like, develop a morality about, like, what's too far in a rebellion and whatnot. All these very interesting things for her character, which are nowhere to be found in the movie. And that's just Katara. With Sokka, he's very funny in the show. He's a wise cracking guy. He's a warrior, but he's not a very good warrior. And he has this whole thing where he's sexist at the beginning of the movie, and he has to learn how to not be sexist, which the show does a really good job of portraying and really gives Sokka some depth really quickly early on, just of him having to deal with this island of female warriors, the Kyoshi warriors, who show Sokka that it's not just men who could fight, well. And they actually teach Sokka, and then Sokka gains respect. And that's just the first ring on his journey to really unpacking his insecurities and his own flaws of his sexism and the skills that he never gained because he never had a father in his life. All these things, um, which again make Sokka the complex and interesting character that he is, and makes us attached to him the way we are in the show. Whereas in the movie, he does nothing besides, again, what the plot necessitates for him to do, which doesn't give him any time to actually develop his own character. You need these character building moments and arcs and episodes in the show so that you can gain an attachment to characters. But that's not in the movie. And it's just a poor adaptation to the characters overall. And lastly, let's just talk about Aang. He is a shell of his former self in the movie. In the show, Aang is a naive child who is happy-go-lucky and wants to just wants to just have fun and have a good time. Um, and that's a big part of Aang's character, and that is a big part of his character development throughout the whole show, let alone just book one, is learning to take the responsibility of being the Avatar, learning to accept it, embrace it, and grow up a bit to the greater duties that he has, and realize that life can't just be all fun and games, and life is hard, and life has stuff that you have forced to do. But in the movie, Aang doesn't really get this. He's not really naive or childlike. He's just sort of there again for the plot, but even more so, he already is pretty level-headed and understanding of his responsibilities. He's not like fully like he's not like a master avatar or anything, but you could tell that he isn't trying to run away from this, which is what happened in the original show. The whole thing was just Aang trying to run away, and that's why he got trapped underwater. But none of this is mentioned really, and it's honestly it takes away a lot from what Aang is as a character, and what he teaches the viewers. And by stripping that away from him in the movie and just having him sort of already be accepting of that responsibility, even if you say otherwise and you explain the backstory of how he ran away from his responsibility, it's not as impactful because you're telling and not showing, which is what the movie does. And it really harpens on his character and what he could be if they had just followed the source material and adapted it correctly. And that ends our segment on characters. Um, the quick little wrap up of that, though, is that just they butcher the characters in this movie by not adapting the traits that these characters actually had, negative or positive, and not doing a good job of showcasing how these characters change over time and letting us attach them. Another thing I really want to mention, although it's not as important as the characters, is this movie does a really bad job at carrying over the aesthetics that you find in the show. Particularly, I think with the bending. The bending is it's really bad. I even have a clip actually to show you of the bending in the movie, and we'll see it right now. I'll play it for you. And yeah, I think that bending speaks for itself, honestly. It's slow moving and with a lot of unnecessary movements, which is completely opposite from any of the bending in the show, which I think we might see later on a little bit of it. Um, it's really a setback for the movie because the bending is such a huge part of the show. It showcases more than just attacks. It showcases the personality of the wielders. Bending, firebenders are ferocious and they're vicious with their styles. It's like overpowering almost. Earthbenders are strong and stable like the earth. Waterbenders flow like water, and airbenders are free like the air. But you don't really get any of this in the show. You don't. It doesn't showcase the personality, and besides, just not looking good like it does here, it doesn't showcase the personalities that you get in the show. And it just takes away so much from the aesthetics wise. Because if it's not going to look good and it's not going to showcase the personalities, then why really is it even there? It's not. Besides one scene towards later, which I'm going to show, it's not really that important. I feel like um, they missed the ball there a lot. I would say with the bending, especially I didn't even mention it, but firebenders have to get fire from a source, or most of them at least have to get fire from an already existing source, which would make no sense because that would make firebenders almost powerless in most situations if they couldn't create their own fire like they do in the show. And just things like that is really it really harpens on the world feeling real. That and along with the cut content that you see in this movie, which is it's a lot. They cut a lot. The original show and book one is mostly Aang's side adventures, you could say, slice of life sort of things of him slowly adventuring through the world and having a good time and character develop moments for the characters and whatnot. Um, and world building, you get to learn more about the world, the Kyoshi warriors, the creatures in this world who are like usually comprised of two different animals, the Asian aesthetics and cultures that permeate everywhere in this universe. And in the movie, you don't get any of this because it's all cut. All of it is cut. Uh, there's no Kyoshi warriors. There's no Magi, which is a big sea serpent in the ocean. There is only the prison outbreak in the Earth Kingdom, and some scenes with the Fire King, I guess. You can see the Fire Kingdom, and that's it. You don't get to see any other characters besides the main three, really, and Zuko. And it's a shame. It's a shame because it takes away from this world being lived in, like the original show. It takes away from it. It takes away from the world building. Is what I'm trying to say. Which harpens on you feeling connected to this planet and Aang's mission to save it from Fire Lord domination. Which also another thing that they cut is the Sozin's Comet, or they didn't cut it, but they moved it to being at the end of book one, whereas it's in the middle of book one usually when it first gets mentioned. Sozin's Comet is important because it creates narrative tension for the show, starting in like halfway of the book one, you start realizing, oh, now Aang has a purpose. He can't just go adventuring anymore. He has to master the four elements, starting with water because it's the closest one to him, in order to stop Sozin's comet at the end of summer. It gives you a deadline and it builds tension in everything Aang's going to do from now on because he has a mission now. He can't just be dilly-dallying like he has been. In the movie, Aang just there's none of this narrative tension. Aang is just doing this training because he's the Avatar, so he's just doing it to to rebel against the Fire Nation, sure, but there's no immediate threat, unlike the show, which honestly makes the movie quite boring in my opinion. I at least was bored while I was watching it. So besides the cut content of the world building and the and taking away the narrative tension and the horrible CGI, of course, and the butchering of our characters. We also, I feel like storytelling wise in this, it's kind of, mm, it's not as impactful of a storytelling method of using movies versus, at least, not this movie. Maybe in better hands it would have been a better movie, but in this movie the storytelling is just not in the medium. It's just not fully utilized. But we already touched on the aesthetics and the CGI. Of course, that's not very good. But the acting also here it takes away a lot because it's mostly honestly very bland, and a lot of the characters' names are mispronounced from how they are in the show for some reason. Aang in the show turns into Ong in the movie, and just countless other examples. It's ridiculous and tragic. That is to say, though, with bad acting and all that, the movie does have, I would say, one good scene, which I will play for you right now. It's after the siege. It's during the siege of the Northern Water Tribe, where Aang has to stop the army, and I'll compare this scene to how it played out in the show, and you can give your thoughts.
Water teaches us acceptance. Let your emotions flow like water.
It basically uses the full control of the Avatar state through his emotions flowing and creates a huge tidal wave that wipes out all the Fire Nation soldiers and their fleet. Um, this scene actually is pretty impactful, I think, for the movie, and might be because of the beautiful OST, which is probably like the best thing that came out of this movie. It's it's interesting that they decided to go with a controlled version of the Avatar state here. This whole movie doesn't showcase the destructive nature of the Avatar state, how it is in the show, at least in book one in the show. Whenever Aang goes in the Avatar state, he can't control it, and he ends up destroying and hurting the people he cares about, and so it's seen almost as a bad thing, or at least a very dangerous thing. However, in the movie, that's not really showcased. The Avatar state is more of just a state of being that isn't really too bad, but it it still is like still powerful. You know what I mean? And this scene does a good deal of giving you some emotional resonance. I feel like it would have done even better had it given you the more character moments like I described earlier. But it's still there and it's still interesting. It's still a well done scene, I think. Something that I do think is an interesting departure from the original, in terms of an adaptation. It's an interesting choice that they did to do it this way instead of how originally it's depicted in the show, which is, well, let's see, I'll talk about it after. You get to see the wrathful side of the Avatar state there. It's the ocean spirit actually controlling Aang, and it does not care about killing everyone who is trying to fight back against him. That's why all the waterbenders bow like he's a god. It really showcased the powerful nature of the Avatar state and sets up Aang's trauma that he'll get later on from it, and why he won't use the Avatar state in the next season, at least like for the first episode or two, because of what happened here. So it's an interesting departure. If they were going to do a sequel, I wonder how they would have done it with all the characters they included. But it's an interesting way that they decided to go against showing the wrathful side of the Avatar state, and instead opting for a more controlled version and emotion-filled um, version, whereas this one is more not just like sadness emotion, but this one in the show is more rage and wrathful, and destructive version of the Avatar state. Both different endings, but it's interesting how they did that. And lastly, before I give my wrapped up thoughts, I want to quickly talk about the an in-universe adaptation that we see in Avatar towards the end in Book 3 with the Ember Island players. This is essentially an in-universe stage adaptation of the Avatar story told through a playwright in the world of Avatar who wrote it. Um, it's it's interesting. I wouldn't call it an actual adaptation because obviously it's in the show, but it's very meta and almost like a commentary on how fans view the show and how um, how the future would be when it comes to adapting this show in terms of mischaracterizing characters. I'll play a little funny clip of Katara reacting to how they portray Katara in this stage adaptation.
Every day the world awaits a beacon to guide us, yet none appears. Still, we cannot give up hope, for hope is all we have, and we must never relinquish it, even to our dying breath.
Well, that's just silly. I don't sound like that.
Oh man, this writer's a genius!
So that's just a funny little thing I wanted to mention from the show. It has its own in-universe adaptation, which you could argue might be better than the movie. I don't know. But it's a funny critique nonetheless of how people view and interpret the show, and um, commentary on actual adaptations that would come up later on. Pointing out the flaws within the creators pointing out the flaws within their own series. So, some closing thoughts on Avatar: The Last Airbender, the movie by M. Night Shyamalan. It's, in my opinion, a poor adaptation of the original uh, Nickelodeon show. It does a poor job at adapting the characters. It keeps the ritualistic aspects, of course, of the actual plot, of what happens. At least the beginning, finding the boy in the iceberg, and of the rebellion against the Fire Nation, and then the siege of the Northern Water Tribe, and the Avatar State dealing the final blow to it all, and the Moon Spirits. It keeps that. That's true, but where it differs from the show as an adaptation, it just doesn't carry over in the character depth, doesn't carry over the storytelling, the beautiful animation, um, and the importance of bending, the any really most of the aspects of the show doesn't carry over. The world building, the countless colorful character cast, which makes sense because it's a movie, but I just feel like they didn't think hard enough about said movie when adaptating it. So those are my final thoughts. I want to say thank you for listening, and I'll catch you later. Bye bye.